It's my pleasure to share with you the following video of the TimeSlips 2020 Creative Care Institute, which took place online on July 15th and 16th. I'm Carol Varney, Executive Director of TimeSlips, and I hope you'll find some inspiration and tools in these videos that you can use in your own work with the elders in your life. In the spirit of place, as we begin, I want to offer a land acknowledgement, just as I did during the Institute itself. This is a land acknowledgement for where I am right now, but TimeSlips is an international organization, and I hope that each of you watching this video from wherever you are will take a moment to acknowledge the indigenous communities who have been and remain stewards of the land on which each of us reside. This is one very small way to recognize that colonialism is a current, ongoing process, and that it is in all of our best interest to dismantle it as we strive to connect creatively and meaningfully with each other. The land I'm speaking to you from today is the original homeland of the Nauset. I acknowledge the history of genocide and the forced removal of the Nauset from this territory. I also want to acknowledge that today, indigenous communities in the United States have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, with the Navajo Nation being most heavily affected. With a population of 173,667, the Navajo Nation had 7,549 confirmed cases and 363 deaths attributed to COVID as of the beginning of July, which is a higher per capita rate than anywhere else in the United States. I hope we will work collectively to ensure that this new chapter of history will never again be repeated. COVID-19 was, in fact, the reason we met virtually for the Institute rather than in person, though it also meant that many more people could join us during the Institute and now also online, and for that I'm grateful. TimeSlips' mission is to bring meaning and purpose into the lives of elders through creative engagement, something we've been doing as a nonprofit organization since 2013. Since March of 2020, now with over 900 certified facilitators around the world, we've been working to adapt models for engagement to ensure that our elders can remain connected in spite of safety measures that have made it hard or impossible to connect in person. The Creative Care Institute offers insights into the intersection of the arts and healthcare and provides an opportunity to look at, as TimeSlips founder Ann Basting says, what we can do. I want to thank the John D. and Kathryn T. MacArthur Foundation, as well as Bader Philanthropies, whose support made it possible for us to offer such incredible speakers and workshops free of charge during the Institute. I also want to thank the board and staff of TimeSlips, who worked incredibly hard during what was already a challenging time to ensure that the Institute could happen with such stellar programming. Now join me to kick off the Institute with field practitioners who set the stage for us over the 2 days in a conversation called Creative Engagement Now, Why, and How. TimeSlips Board President Kathryn Washington was the moderator of our plenary panel. Kathryn is the Senior Director of Content Strategy at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, where she provides leadership to CPB's efforts to ensure that public media content and services reflect the spectrum of American society. In addition to serving as TimeSlips Board President, Kathryn serves on Washington, D.C.'s Age-Friendly City Commission and Information Task Force. I hope this plenary session will give you the inspiration we all felt during the Institute.
It's wonderful being here, and good morning, everyone from around the world. This is exciting. I don't think I've done a meeting or a Zoom meeting with so many people on it. So let's talk a little bit about why we're here today in this plenary. In this Institute, and at this calamitous historical moment, we're here to collectively explore the power and potential of the arts at the intersection of health. Right now in the US, there are more older adults living alone than ever before. Home care and direct care workers in the US are underpaid and often lack access to healthcare themselves. A pandemic is ravaging US long-term healthcare systems, with nearly 40% of deaths from COVID happening within those long-term care communities. And at the same time, the institutions that gather us together and give us shared meaning, purpose, hope, and joy have shut down: theaters, music venues, museums, places of worship. And yet, the arts, artists, and community builders are also finding ways to support and inspire each other, which is why there are over 400 of you on this conversation today. So let me tell you a little bit about how we've structured this conversation. Because we have so many interesting people and they have so much to say. We're going to have this broken down into two groups. Then we're going to bring everyone back together. And from there, we will go into our Q&A. So I'd like to begin now with introducing everyone that is on the panel. So if we can bring up everyone that is here, and I will do the introductions, that would be great. There we go. I'm beginning to see you all. There's perfect. So Dr. Lisa Cooper, if you could wave. So there we go. Dr. Lisa Cooper is an internal medicine physician, public health researcher, and international thought leader on health disparities. A 2007 MacArthur Fellow and professor at Johns Hopkins University, Dr. Cooper's research demonstrates how race and socioeconomic factors shape relationships in healthcare and how patients and health systems in partnerships with communities can improve outcomes for vulnerable populations. Next is Vijay Gupta. Vijay is a violinist and a social justice advocate. An esteemed performer, communicator, and citizen artist, Gupta is a leading advocate for the role of the arts and music to heal, inspire, provoke change, and foster social connection. He is the founder of artistic director of Street Symphony, a nonprofit organization providing musical engagement, dialogue, and teaching artistry for homeless and incarcerated communities in Los Angeles. Vijay is a 2018 MacArthur Fellow. Carmelita Karhoff is a longtime advocate for enhancing well-being of persons living with dementia. She is presently serving as project director for a grant-funded project to advance the work of Dementia Inclusive Durham in Durham, North Carolina. Next, we have Liz Lerman. Liz began working with older adults in 1975, and since then has developed many intergenerational performance events taking place in shipyards, hospitals, parks, law schools, and concert stages. She has an obsession with developing tools that are adaptable and usable by others, and is currently organizing a digital commons called the Atlas of Creative Tools. Liz is an institute professor at Arizona State University and a recipient of the 2002 MacArthur Genius Grant. And finally, Ann Basting is a scholar and artist whose work focuses on the potential for the arts and humanities to transform our lives as individuals and communities. For over 20 years, she has researched ways to infuse the arts into care settings with a particular focus on people with cognitive disabilities like dementia. Named a 2016 MacArthur Fellow, Ann is the founder of Time Slips and the reason we are all gathered here today. So thank all of you for being here. And I think I'm going to go into the first small group, and our first grouping will be Lisa in conversation with Vijay. There we go. Thank you both for being here. And I'm just going to toss some questions for you, and we'll see how it goes. I noticed that you both have your mics on, so that's good. They're both off now. So the first question I would really like to ask, and Lisa, I'm going to start with you. Can you share a sentence or two about yourself, where you live, and what your work has been, I would say, under normal circumstances before COVID?
I am in Clarksville, Maryland. It's a suburb of Baltimore and Washington, D.C. And, you know, as you mentioned, I'm a general internist, primary care physician. I'm also a public health physician. So I've worked for many years with community to try to improve access to care, but also just health outcomes for underserved groups, predominantly African Americans and Hispanics here in the Washington and Baltimore area. And, you know, right now we've been, you know, very much engaged with these communities because of the disparate impact of COVID-19. So we do research, we do translation of that research into policy. We also educate and train academics as well as build capacity in community. And we do all of this in complete engagement with community partners.
That's wonderful. Vijay, what about you?
Hi there, welcome everyone. I'm so honored to be with you and stunned to be amongst such luminous company. I'm speaking to you from cloudy Pasadena, California this morning. This is the land of Tongva people, and the work that has informed my life and my presence here today is an organization I started about 10 years ago called Street Symphony, which arose in response to the largest concentration of unhoused people in America today, which is which is the Skid Row community of downtown Los Angeles. And a lot of the work that I do is informed by art makers, not only art organizations like Los Angeles Poverty Department, as well as shelters and clinics dedicated to serving vulnerable populations, but also in response to art that has sustained and made resilient the Skid Row community for the last 3 decades. The work of Street Symphony is to create bridges for artists to not only be artists on stage, but also artists in community, where we are both giving and receiving and holding up mirrors to each other. For many years, I was a musician, a first violinist in the Los Angeles Philharmonic. I started playing the violin and performing at a young age. And I find that my work as a musician is an act in the Hindu tradition of sadhana, of worshipful service. And that the terminus of that service is not only an audience who can pay for it, but actually truly the divinity that might reside within me and within all of us. So I'll pause there with my hopefully coherent introduction.
No, that's wonderful. So, you know, I'm going to ask this because you both brought it up a little bit, just sort of how things are changing here. So in your work, what has COVID-19 revealed that might have been previously ignored? And what has changed in your work because of that? Lisa, why don't you start? What has COVID revealed for you in your work? And again, what has changed because of it?
I think COVID has revealed to us many things, has revealed to the rest of the world a lot of things that many of us were pretty familiar with. So I think that there are a lot of people who weren't aware of the fact that there are all these barriers to people being healthy that exist for people who come from underserved communities, predominantly people of color, and also, you know, people who are struggling with financial and economic issues. So I think a lot of that work they were things that we already knew, but I think one of the things that has really come to light is how interconnected our fates are, and how, as a society, how dependent we are on one another, and how we sort of our fates are intertwined because we sort of rise and fall together. And I think it's more apparent now than it ever was before, because we are seeing that when some people are struggling and not doing well, it impacts everything, you know. So we think about a lot of people of color being frontline workers and having to go out and work during this time when other people were able to work at home or stay at home, and having to go out looking for food because they couldn't afford to, you know, store it up for several weeks at a time. And we saw, you know, people getting sick, and therefore a lot of other things that we might have become accustomed to coming to a halt because we are so dependent on each other. So I think that's one thing that's really come to light. And I think we're doing a lot of the same things that we've been doing, but I think we're having to be very much more creative about reaching out to people and not expecting them to be able to engage in some of the technologies that we, you know, many of us have the luxury of being able to afford. So being able to call people on the phone, or even send people out to sort of look out for people, like door to door, maybe not go in their homes, but just to check on them. So those are just a few things.
So you're finding yourself more in the community instead of waiting for people to come to you. You're doing more of going out to them. Is that what you're saying? How has it changed your work?
Well, I'm saying that we went out to community anyway, but I think, like, even for example, one of the things we did was we have quarterly meetings with our community advisory board. And what we did was, actually, when this all happened, we called people individually. We asked them what they were dealing with, what they were struggling with. And then we really sort of galvanized and you know, connected people with resources. And if it meant that one of us had to drive and go and pick up groceries and take it to a community site so that people could have food to pick up, you know, that's what we did. And I think these are things that we think about, but in this particular time, I think it's made us even more sort of aware and activated about meeting people's immediate needs, but then also hearing their concerns and taking them to policymakers, you know, talking to local leaders and and national leaders about the crisis and how it's impacting those communities and advocating for it, helping to advocate for them.
That's great. I'm going to bring you in, Vijay, to hear, sort of what you've seen and what's changed in your work since COVID.
Well, I actually love the fact that Lisa brought up the fact that you're bringing in groceries, because I actually feel like that's literally what we're doing. We're actually individually delivering food. Right now, in actually about 6 minutes, my team at Street Symphony is starting a Zoom session with a reentry center in Skid Row, which primarily works with individuals who are paroled from life sentences in prison. And we were meeting weekly for this kind of process group therapy session in person, where we bring in musicians, and the musicians would be in dialogue with individuals who had experienced incarceration, many of whom are artists and musicians themselves. And now, because of COVID, and not only because of the technology, but because our scale has changed so much, we are focusing on acts of deep, intentional love on the individual basis. What can we do with this time that we have now? And how can we be as intentional as possible? Because I think that what this time has laid bare in our work is the myth that scale for the sake of scale is better, that bigger is better, and that this kind of rat race that artists have had to employ or kind of even pathologize in our work of saying, well, we've got to be big to meet the numbers and therefore justify our work, we can put that to rest. And so we are actually choosing no longer to live into that myth, that we know that what is sustaining us, what has always sustained us, is our relationships. Is the relationships with community members, is a relationship with the stewards of the places that we have are given access to. And right now, our work is relational maintenance, is to know that even if we can't go into a shelter or a clinic or a county jail right now, it behooves us to find ways to continue making that human offering, which inspired our work to begin with. And the other thing that I think is important to say is, similarly to what Lisa just mentioned, this time has been an apocalypse in the literal meaning of the word, in the sense that it has uncovered, it has revealed to us again the systemic issues that were already there. I mean, along with the pandemic of COVID, we had the pandemic of racism, we had the pandemic of structural violence, we had the pandemic of systemic inequality. And the truth is, we brought COVID in to Skid Row. We brought COVID in to the nursing homes. We brought COVID in to the prisons and the county jails and into spaces that we had always called the other. So I think that this time has actually held up a very humbling mirror to us, as all of our work does, and especially as art making does. And I think it's a time to take a look into that humbling mirror and be willing to redraw our maps.
That's actually really beautiful. And what I love about what both of you have said, ultimately in the end, what this moment has meant is that you're digging deep into this relationship building. And it's really one-to-one. And I think that's really beautiful. And I think just one more quick question, a quick round for both of you before we switch out to the next group is, you're an artist. What Lisa did not say is that she's a musician too. So my question is, as the arts are related to this relationship development, how do the arts fit into this notion of developing these deep needed relationships within the community and with individuals? Now, Lisa, it's unfair because you don't work as a musician, but I am interested in how you think about the arts in relationship to the work that you do and health disparities and the need for art to build a bridge.
Certainly, yeah. So I grew up in a family of healers as well as artists. And so, I think that I grew up with a love of music. I played the piano. And so I recognize the beauty and the joy that the arts bring to life and how they connect us as humans. And so I think one of the things that has been a really, a blessing in all of our work at the Center for Health Equity is that we use music, we use poetry to help people sort of connect. We ask people when we have speakers who come to speak at we call them Health Equity Jam sessions, we ask them to share what some of their favorite music is. And we play that music at the beginning of the session so that people can sort of, get a sense of who that person is that they're going to be hearing from. We held a special program on maternal health mortality, maternal disparities in maternal mortality last year. And at the end of that seminar series, we sang Lift Every Voice and Sing, because we knew that that was an uplifting song, a song that is symbolic for the African-American community here in the US, and that it would give people a sense of hope and strength as they left from that forum and that conversation. We had a graphic artist who came to one of our retreats and actually created a graphic representation of our conversation for the day. And so we have copies of that, and we gave that out to everyone. We even had mugs made with the conversation graphically displayed on it, so that we can always remember what it was like in that day and the important parts of that conversation. And I think the visualization of it is a common language for all of us. So those are the ways in which we tend to use arts in our work and to create community.
It's beautiful, and it's not what anyone would suspect probably in going in the door there, right?
Right.
Which is why it's beautiful. Vijay, I think people would be expecting arts, but can you say a little bit about that from your point of view before we jump off to the next group?
Certainly. So again, I love Lisa. I'm totally going to steal the Health Equity Jam session. I think Anne is going to as well. And it's so critical for us to keep listening, right? It's so critical for us to keep listening. One of the yearly projects of Street Symphony is to present a sing-along of Handel's Messiah in Skid Row at the Midnight Mission. And this kind of culminating event comes after weeks, if not months, of workshops and community building and meetings with caseworkers and community members. And each successive year, we take out more and more of the Handel so that we can actually have the community voices and community compositions be the ones that occupy the center of the space. And so our role as artists has always been to be the listeners of spaces. But right now, I'm thinking about our role as artists as the next responders. The first responders have not been able to complete the full human calling of the first response, in the sense that the role of the first responders has always been to start the process of grieving, the process of consolation, the beginning of the human process of letting go. We don't have access to that important fundamental human ritual. And so even though we're not able to make art at the very highest levels of scale, again, the myth of scale, we actually do have the opportunity to go scale deep inside ourselves and bring ourselves to the understanding that our role as artists is to be the next responders, in the sense that it's our job to cultivate new rituals for ourselves. And as we cultivate new rituals for ourselves, we cultivate a new cultural awareness. What is the deep cultural awareness of self? What is the deep cultural awareness of one-to-one, right? And I think in cultivating that ritual of integrity every single day, over and over and over again, that is the work that artists have always done. And truthfully, that's the work that healers have always done, is the work that citizens have always done, is the work that educators have always done. And so I think that this metaphor of constant daily ritual is something that is certainly sustaining me right now.
That's beautiful. I love it. And I just want to get up. You should see the chat going crazy with so many of the things that you both have said. Can we now bring up Liz and Anne and Carmelita? Good morning. I just can't tell you how thrilled I am to be talking to so many MacArthur Grant Fellows. I mean, this it's so heady. So why don't I just start with the same question for you guys as well for this group, which is, just tell us a little bit about who you are, very quickly, who you are, what your work is, where you are, and what you normally do under different circumstances than we find ourselves in. And I'll go ahead and start with you, Carmelita.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Carmelita Karhoff from Durham, North Carolina. And I have to say, I feel so humbled to be in the presence of all the MacArthur and very well accomplished fellows. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to join you. A quick background information to give some point of why I'm here with you today. I was formerly serving for 10 years as the long-term care ombudsman for the Triangle region here in North Carolina, and the last 7 of those focused in Durham County. It is that work that brought me to understand the need to pay attention and to realize persons with cognitive challenges and the needs that they have that we really need to address to, especially those living in the community. So I gave up a beloved work and 2017 started a collaborative of grassroots volunteers to look at what can we do as a group of individuals to make a difference in those lives of persons with cognitive challenges, primarily those living with dementia. Grassroots, no funding, but we were so fortunate to have received an award late last year for a 3-year grant project to advance the work of Dementia Inclusive Durham. And in that, I am forever grateful that we were able to get approval to work with Anne and Time Slips, a marvelous opportunity to use creative care as our primary intervention for the project. So that's why I am here right now serving as the project director for that initiative. And thank you again, Anne.
Thank you, Carmelita. Liz, can you say a few words?
Sure. Again, I want to thank everybody for being here, and it's so thrilling to, at the beginning, to see everybody type in where you come from. It's a reflection to me about the times that we're in, that everything is extremely local. You are in your house, you are in your place, you with just the student one-to-one on Zoom, and at the same time we have this opportunity to be global like we are this morning. It's quite profound. You know, I love listening to Vijay. I'm always thrilled. I get very inspired and re-inspired as an artist. And I'll just say for myself right now, I'm in Tempe, Arizona, at Arizona State, which is, but I still, before COVID, spending a tremendous amount of time out and about in the world. But the thing that has been revealed to me a little bit is this: things broke. Things broke down. And I'm curious, when things break down, how fast do we want to rebuild them back to what they were? And just 2 quick examples. One, I was just listening yesterday to a story of a nurse. She was in New York in the heart of all of this, and she's come out to Arizona to help. And she described what was going on at the beginning of COVID in her unit, and how what broke down was the hierarchy. The doctors were actually asking the nurses, like, what did you find out? What did you notice? She said it was amazing. Nobody cared about people's position. Everybody was trying to problem solve. Now that is a break in the system. I hope they don't go back to the old ways. I hope they figured something out from that. Same with us at the university. You know, healings in the dance program I'm a part of, healing has emerged over the last few years in many, many discussions, particularly around race, culture, the changes that we need to make within our own systems. But with COVID, it became okay for, excuse me, high-class artistic people to talk about healing and not to dismiss it or place it less than some of the other artistic practices that we care about. And that's where Vijay got us to in his last thing, bringing together education, spirit, art all together. And again, this is one of those things that I pray we don't fall back into some of these ridiculous, actually harmful silos where we are not able to cross over and talk to each other. And you know, for myself, if we get more into it, the whole history of my work has been, in a way, all the ways in which you can re-imbue the active embodiment with all the things that were there in the first place: wisdom, knowledge, spirit, joy, and of course, you know, stretch.
That's that's beautiful. Thank you, Liz. Thank you so much. And I think everyone knows you in some ways, but perhaps you can talk about your work in ways that people don't know you. If there's something new happening.
First, I'm just, it's going to be hard to like concentrate rather than dive into these threads that have just already beautifully been woven. I'm just really thankful for everybody who's joined us today. I'm in Milwaukee, across the street from Lake Michigan, which has been a godsend during this time to have both the home that Liz talks about, this intensity of home, and yet the vastness of the horizon right across the street. So this sense of balance of nature and the intense intimacy of home. I have a strange, like I'm not doing direct service like Lisa but I'm both at the university teaching, just moving over to the English department, and trying to arrange a syllabus for a storytelling class, which I always incorporate service learning in all of my work, in all of my teaching, and contemplating how to shift that now in this moment, and to invite the students into that same sense of discovery of, I think the phrase I've uttered to myself, and someone mentioned it before, is, what can I do? I think I'm a hyperactive doer, which has been really instructive for me in this moment of calming down and being still, and having, one of the things that I think broke in Liz's terminology is that chaotic schedule, where I was traveling many times a month to give talks. And what happens in this new moment where we're not traveling, where we're seeing stillness? What can we do now? What feeds us? And turning toward what have we been doing that we can simply share out. I think with Time Slips, one of the great, incredible joys that we have is that it's really designed to inspire other people's creativity, and to use it as a way to say, in this moment, creativity is a generative process that we can invite other people into. It calms us, it reduces stress, and how can we feel that ourselves? And then how can we turn and invite that one other person into that state as well? So I think a lot of what we've been doing is just that, seeing how we could take all that we've built and resources and just calmly invite other people to experience that creativity and generosity.
That's beautiful. I have, it's funny because the follow-up question is kind of where you ended, which is really about, we're talking about the power and potential of the arts, right? Specifically, how they're used to build relationship and community. And you went actually straight to how you can use it for yourself first, which I think is really powerful. So I am wondering, how would you define this power, the power of the arts, to define sort of and help move us to this next place? And I want all of you to say something. I was just given a time check that I have about 3 more minutes, but I think but I really want to make sure that I hear from each of your points of view, because they're so different about the power and potential of the arts. So Anne, why don't we start with you, because you're still on screen, and then we'll bring up Liz and Carm to finish us out.
Sure, and I'll touch back to something Vijay said, which is, I think this moment is a flood of emotion, and that our rituals and our myths and our stories have broken, and that the symbolic and emotional language of any discipline in the arts, movement, painting, music, poetry, anything, if you're using words, sound, image, can help us rebuild and express those and channel those emotions of this moment. I think we've lost kind of a reason or a meaningfulness behind, you know, that statistic. Almost 40% of the deaths, and the most vulnerable are older adults, frail elders, which is, you know, right at the heart of the work I've been doing for 20 plus years. And there's a lot of grief and fear, and that the arts can help process that language, and that at the same time, in Liz's terms, you know, help through narrative and through the through the creative process. And then just very simply, that emotional and symbolic language is accessible to people with in almost any moment of their lives, because it's not that rational language that we prioritize and is in the hierarchy. Maybe that's another thing, the hierarchy that's broken, is that the language, that emotional and symbolic language, is actually become prioritized in this moment, which I also hope we can keep.
That's beautiful. Carm, where are you? Carmelita.
Yeah.
The Power of the Arts in Durham.
Well,
I'm so excited to be working with time slips. So clearly you're a convert.
of course, definitely. Yeah, definitely. So, of course, we make use of the tremendous arts culture here in Durham, and that's basically actually the reason why we were able to pursue time slips as the approved approach for our Dementia Inclusive Durham project. And there is no better time for the arts to be in a powerful position as it is right now, in my thinking. Our project is very new. We are still in the planning phase. So of course, COVID-19 kind of put a damper on our ability to move faster than where we are. But while we are in this process that has slowed us down, what is becoming more evident is that there is a lot more desire for people to connect and to create community. And I think that is because of the power of the human need for ability to support, ability to offer ourselves, and the ability to be part of a bigger cause than we are. And I think that that's in a way, as much as these are unprecedented times, we have to look at what are the things that the situation we are in is offering. And a lot of people in Durham County are buying into the idea of creative engagement, of which is what the project that we are working with Anne is all about. And I wish I have all of the time to tell you exactly what we're dreaming about, but I'm sure down the road, if you look at time slips and some of our
Carmelita, give us
Facebook
one
page.
dream. Just give us one of the dream. What are you dreaming?
Okay, one of the dreams. So we are planning to create about 6 sites where we will be engaging persons with dementia to be spending time together, and this will be facilitated by volunteers who are trained by Anna and her team on how to engage. And in a way, it not only benefits the person with dementia, but that person from the community who's offering their service, because it makes them aware of what's the best way to ask a question, what's the best way to engage, that there are many ways that you can enhance the quality of life without going into the medical component of dementia. So those 6 sites, our vision is that they create stories, they make connections, and out of those engagements, which is probably about once a month, stories will come out. And Anne is envisioning having a composer create a melody, a song, whatever will come out of that, a story that the children's choir in Durham will perform in a bigger get together before the end of the project to present to the community. So that's really creative, and a lot of people are excited on that opportunity. It gives a lot of people who are saying, but I don't have a drop of art in my DNA. And I always say, but Ann Basting said, all you need is heart.
That's
And,
beautiful.
and that has been taken very seriously. So that to me is the power that we really need to harness right now.
I love that. I love it. Liz, just for you, you have so much and so much of a background that does a lot of things, but I think you're the only person here that really is, working in this choreographic embodied space, right? So I'm curious from your point of view, when you think about the power of the arts and the power of what you bring, we would really love to hear a little bit about what you've got. Now, I think I've got like 2 minutes before we switch, so if we could just hear quickly, that would be great, Liz.
Thank you. And I think actually I'm moved by everybody's thoughts. And Anne took us to the place of talking about, for a minute, the question about death. And I think that's where I'd like to just talk for a minute about what embodiment does. In my 10 years at the Roosevelt Hotel for Senior Citizens, one of the things that emerged was when someone died, we would make a dance for that person in a week or two afterwards, recalling things we had loved about the person. Sometimes it was a particular movement they would always do, no matter what the story was. Sometimes it was just a particular way, and we would, of course, translate, because when you're doing the movement, sometimes it's an exact thing, but a lot of times it's an approximation of any number of things that are happening for people. I think a lot about what that was for us as a community within this rather large facility that I was working in. And I think for people, knowing that death is coming or closer, that knowing that people were going to celebrate them in this way was one thing. And then just the way that it, as you said, Anne, not calm, but somehow brings about an awareness, a close up to what life really is. And I just want to say, during this COVID time, I've had 2 close friends lose their mothers. And I'm on the phone with them, and we are talking again about the power of loss, but what you do with those feelings. And of course, embodiment is a beautiful way to address it. Or in some cases over the phone, I'll say things like, well, that one place that's missing now for you, what's the symbol you want to put there? If you could build something, what would you put there? So there's something about addressing the intensity of life's moments that art does. And the second thing I just want to say in relationship to the power of art is that this is not experimental. This is not a maybe. This actually, when people say, traditional, whatever, this is tradition. It's the conventions of contemporary, I don't know, I don't want to say science, because right now when it's under attack, you want to do everything you can to support science and medicine. But honestly, when I am so frustrated by the fact that people still think this is experimental. We know this works in every single way possible.
That's amazing. And so true. We're actually back to who we are as human beings in a lot of ways. This is the fundamental nature of being human. So can I bring up everyone now, the whole panel, to have what I am sure is going to be a way too short conversation. So, the question I have for everybody as we get everyone on screen, and I'm not sure if you're going to see them all or how that's going to work. But what I'm really struck by here is it's been said in different pockets, but we're seeing innovation, resilience, creativity in all of your work, right? So I'm interested in hearing where you are seeing that. If you can explain for the audience, maybe they can get some takeaways, where you are seeing innovation, where you are seeing resilience and creativity. What is out there that you can bring into this conversation for us to think about, put in the chat, and maybe take home with us? And let me go back to, I'm going to go back to Vijay if he is up.
I was just thinking, oh, I would love a little bit more time to think about this.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, we can go to somebody else, but
I'm on screen, so I'm ready to go. One thing I want to acknowledge is that I have been very lovingly mentored by Liz for a couple of years now, and one of the things that I'm really struck by, that I feel moved to reiterate, is how so much of what we're noticing now was already there, that this is not a reinvention. And so even the word innovation is interesting for us to think about, because when I am awestruck going to a Skid Row shelter or even a prison or a county jail, and to see that people have embodied innovation and creativity and resilience as a way to stay alive. As a way to stay alive. It's the survival instinct of the human being. And I think what that challenges in us is, again, those fundamental myths we tell ourselves about how new this is. I think about how in the Lascaux caves in France, you know, those cave paintings were made in the places where there was the best acoustics in the cave. And that's important because those were spaces of ritual, right? So they weren't making art to make art and then living their lives to live their lives. They were living their lives as art. And so I want to bring us back to this space of leaning in. And I think one thing that it requires of us is to remain curious. I think and one of the things I learned from Liz is that the questions are way more important than the answers. They have always been, and they always will be. I think Elie Wiesel said something like, well, if we're asking questions, then we're having a dialogue. If I've heard an answer, then the dialogue's over. We're done. we're not having a conversation any longer. So I think maybe perhaps in being caught like a deer in headlights, I'll pause there because I'm curious to hear.
No, I think you said some really interesting stuff, and I'm going, well, this is great. Let's just improv from there. I'm interested in your response to that, because again, we're getting into this daily ritual in this sense that, you know, we all know deep in our DNA how to respond, and that it's the work of artists to remind us. That's kind of what I'm hearing from all of you, right? So how does anyone have a response to Vijay sort of putting that out there? I am curious, because so many exciting ideas have been put out. I don't want to just stay on questions if there's a juicy
just
question.
say that, I heard recently from Carlton Turner, who's an amazing leader in our field, who says that innovation is an act of remembrance.
There you go.
And in relationship to that, he said, it's really understanding how much wisdom there is around us. And of course, that leads us to this, the notion about how do you help people understand that they already know. And this idea of personal ritual is an interesting one, because yes, I can teach someone how to make a ritual. Of course, we can do that any number of ways, but it's also beautiful to be able to say that what they're already doing is a ritual, that the manner in which they may reach for the sequence of things that they do in the morning is already a kind of ritual, and that the way we sequence things is meaningful. And in fact, if you want to change things up and change the sequence of your order of things, you might find yourself in a new place. That's also interesting. So giving people the room to understand that, and then to hold the ambiguity that comes up. And of course, that's one of the best things that I think artistic practices can provide, as well as cultural practices can provide, is that things change and you can hold the change too.
It's beautiful. You know, I'm wondering from your point of view, Lisa, you know, because in a lot of ways you work in a set piece. I would assume that things change around you, but people come in and they have expectations. So when you hear this notion of creating ritual in a public health space, what does that, you know, conjure up for you?
So I mean, I think there we have a lot of rituals, you know, in healthcare and in public health. And I think at this time, everything's been disruptive. And so, you know, I think at first there was a panic that set in, but I think that gave way after, you know, people sort of realized that it was not something that was going to, you know, that things were not going to go back to normal right away, that within that we were freed up to become more creative. And so I think a lot of the rituals we have around people coming in, for example, I'm going to talk about healthcare now because that's the other hat I wear, of people coming in for certain problems and getting things done a certain way. We just couldn't do that. And so now we've had to really be in the moment, thinking about what is the thing that would be the most caring and the most loving thing to do for someone in the moment that may not be the typical ritual that we would have relied upon. So you know, we can't, we have to have people try different things or call on different people. They may not be able to go out and get the medicine they need right now, or we might not be able to see whatever it is they're describing something going on in their body, but we can't really touch them or examine them. So we've had to really, you know, use our skills in a different way, our listening skills in a different way, just our reliance on things that are non-medical in a different way, talking to people about other things, other strengths, other resources they have in their life that they can rely on at this time. So I think that's been beautiful. The other thing that's been, I think, freeing for me also is a prayer that I often turn to when I'm feeling overwhelmed. And because, you know, the whole health equity issue is so overwhelming. And I think a lot of people are getting even more of a sense of it now. But I mean, I've dealt with that on a daily basis for the last 25 years or so. And so there's a prayer actually that is called Prophets of a Future Not Our Own. And you may have heard it, but it really talks about the fact that we are not the master builder, that we are the workers, and that there's no way that we can accomplish everything, and we can't even see the full vision of what there is to be done. But in realizing that, that frees us up to do the very best that we can in the moment. And so I've used that poem, and in fact, or that prayer, and it's been a source of sort of inspiration and grounding to me and to several of my colleagues when we look at the situation in which we face right now.
That's interesting. You know, one of the questions that I have, and you started to answer it, is, you know, what advice do you have for people who are committed to making change and a difference in these complicated times? Is there advice for them? And I think that you started us off very well, you know, a daily ritual of prayer,
Mm-hmm.
and one with deep meaning, right?
Right.
And do you have any thoughts? What advice would you have for people trying to make something new happen, something different and stick?
I'm so flooded with thoughts. I'll try my way through this. I want to back up and make an observation that sort of is from what other people have said, that is crystallizing my own thoughts and feelings, which is this moment has revealed, and I just, you know, I just did a book called Creative Care, which is exploring, there's a whole chapter on beautiful questions and a chapter on awe and a chapter on wonder. And so I'm so thick with all of these thoughts. But it also, I really fell into looking at care and reading Arthur Kleinman and looking at how care should be and is the form of human development, that is what we're built for, and that this moment has brought us to a place where we can exercise and practice it, and that the rituals we're referring to, I think, are about practicing. How do we practice care, and the infusion of creativity into care makes it generative, and not about loss. It holds those things that we think are opposite together in a way, and it insists on them being together, which is also a thing at this moment of the prevalence and our inability, more generally as a culture, to deny death and to deny aging. That's done right now. Like, we can't do that anymore. So we're feeling both the power of life and the presence of death simultaneously. So those things, that growth and loss, are together so firmly right now. I think if I'm gonna, I'm looking toward teaching both in inspiring communities in this work in Durham and in students, just to say, feel that and wonder how it might alter your own life and practices. Don't lose it. It feels so precious to have those things brought together so right now. I bought a mandolin. That was one of my coping mechanisms. Like, I'm terrible. I like accumulate bluegrass instruments and I'm terrible at all of them, but it's so fun just to try and play and practice, and to sing. And one of the things I've always been inspired with Liz's work is the Hallelujah Project and the closeness of prayer and breath and song. And some of you who have attended earlier institutes know that oftentimes I sing a song that's adapted from a Wendell Berry poem that is and when I rise, let me rise like a bird joyfully. And when I fall, let me fall like a leaf without regret, joyfully. Again, bringing loss and joy together, and prayer and breath and creative expression. So my advice in this long rambling summation is feel it and let it guide you. And don't lose that feeling of those opposites being drawn together, because it's an incredible privilege to have that back in our lives right now.
That's beautiful, Anne. You know, and I'm gonna switch from that water. Anne is water to me. If I were gonna put you in the 5 elements, right? Anne is water, and I'm interested to hear someone answer that question, Carmelita, because I think what's interesting about what you've done is that you're working in community in these very structured ways. You're navigating, you're navigating people, and you're navigating sort of government, and you're navigating nonprofit organizations. So if you are a single person, like you are an individual who says, I want to make a difference, what advice would you give to someone that might find themselves trying to make a difference in their community?
I think I would, the immediate thought that came to my mind, Kathryn, are your words: be broad, hairy, and audacious. I think that this is a perfect time for that philosophy, because, hey, why not try something new? We are in unprecedented times. Nobody would say it's wrong or it's right. Give it a try. So what I would say is, for an individual, understand if you are taking care of somebody or responsible for a group or an organization who is responsible for taking care of persons with cognitive challenges, don't be afraid to be innovative. Be part of the bigger picture. In Durham County, we've been, in fact, kidded about what were we smoking when we thought about we can have a dementia inclusive community. That is not possible, but we are determined to show that that is real, because we owe it to those with dementia to be inclusive of their abilities, of where they are at this moment in time. But what this project and this COVID-19 is bringing to reality is we can also be as inclusive of everybody in the community to be part of that service to the person with cognitive challenge. And just quickly, Anne mentioned students, for example. As a perfect example, we have a dear friend and colleague who's a professor at Duke, who is engaging her students to be part of that creative community of care. That's a perfect example. And we're thinking about, why not the policemen? Why not train them to know how to ask those questions if they are trying to calm down somebody that they were called to because there's a problem? Or a hairdresser who's trying to engage somebody with cognitive challenge in asking a beautiful question. Why couldn't we train or engage the community to be part of that thinking that there is hope and it's up to us to do something about it?
Yeah, there you go.
I hit the wrong things there, but you excited me so much about your work, and now my video stopped. Okay, I am back. But that, but you really, you inspired me really, because I think that, I would just say for me, I do this work because it's what I enjoy doing. It's not what I do during the day. So this question of how one makes change in this way with the arts, for me, is very powerful. And for me personally, hearing from you and Anne, both the internal work that you can do to hold that space and the daring that you have to also have when you go out in the world to make that change happen is a wonderful balancing act that I think we can all take some heart in. I actually have one last question, and it's for each of you. And you started to actually bring it up, Carmelita. The single thing that unites you guys, this whole panel, is dogged optimism, and in the face of ridiculous, harsh reality. And so you bring curiosity, you have compassion, and I'm really wondering what's next with you guys. So a BHAG, I don't know if everybody knows what a BHAG is, but it is a big, hairy, audacious goal. And so I'd like a round of each of you telling me what your big, hairy, audacious goals are for what's next despite COVID. So you're up. So Carmelita, would start with you, and then I'll move from there.
It will just be, thank you, Kathryn. It will just be following up on what I had originally mentioned. The broad, hairy, and audacious vision is that Durham County will be recognized as a community where everybody is part of the care of that person with cognitive challenge, and that it is part of the day-to-day culture of each of us here in Durham County. Is that broad enough and hairy enough?
Pretty big. I don't know how big Durham County is, but I'm sure that they're quaking in their boots, waiting for this to happen. Lisa, how about you?
Well, let's see, I have a couple of goals that one of them, which I'm a little less optimistic about than the other. So the one I'm more optimistic about is basically creating a cadre of who I'm calling social justice leaders within Baltimore, because I've recently been asked to direct the Urban Health Institute in Baltimore, which has a vision of achieving health equity in Baltimore, which is no small feat. So my vision is to bring together and to create a cadre of social justice leaders who will come from all different sectors of society and different disciplines to work together on some of the most critical issues related to health inequities in the city, and that we will actually be able to close that 20-year gap in life expectancy between neighborhoods that we see that are only 5 miles apart. So that's the one I'm more optimistic about. The one I'm less optimistic about is actually bringing about that kind of sort of change in orientation among healthcare system leaders, which I would actually like to see them be a part of the solution to structural racism. But I think I'll start with the social justice leaders.
I think I have faith that you'll get to both of them, to be honest with you, Lisa. So you'll get it done. Liz, what about you? What's your big, hairy, audacious goal? And now you're on mute.
I'd like to support the two people we just heard from. That both of those, both of what you just said is just so important. I lived in Baltimore for a few years, and Lisa, I just send you so much power, and anything I can do, I will help you. On a personal level, I want to have a lab for risk, purpose, and love. And those are ideas I learned from veterans and veteran circles that I sat in for many years working on the project that I completed just a few years ago. I really feel that each of those things, risk, purpose, and loves, bring about something that is generative and powerful and doable. And I suppose the lab would hold the Atlas of Creative Tools, which would be a digital commons where all these ideas that people are talking about now would have a place to be. Anne's already led the way with the way TimeSlips is working, but just a place where people know that they could go and get these practical approaches, ways of working, so that yes, a police department, Carmelita, absolutely, a police department would say, yes, part of our ongoing education, because I am interested in the difference between education and training. We train ballerinas and we train police officers and we educate other people. And I think there's something in the way those things play out that is worth examining so that people have some agency and in the way that they see the world. But anyway, those are some ideas.
I love it. I think everybody's going to be in one of your labs too.
Great.
Anne, what about you? And you're on mute now too.
Yeah. I was stealing a little think time by finding the unmute button. I see layers in my big, hairy, audacious goal. One is to get good enough to perform bluegrass publicly and not to my shirt. Two is the Beautiful Question project that is the root of Durham. I would love, in the image of water, to pour into every community and to have it be sustaining by having them create their own beautiful questions, and to have those beautiful questions go out with every Meals on Wheels delivery, that it just pours into the water of care and becomes integrated fully. And then as part of that, the largest is the continuing dissolve between those silos and hierarchies, so that at long last, the sectors of arts and culture and health and social services are integrated through a sustainable fund that might be called social prescribing or something. This is like when I have the clarity in this befuddled moment to imagine a structure beyond this one. That is what I'm dreaming of.
That's absolutely beautiful. And Vijay, we'll end with you.
I got to buy myself the most time, but as a consequence, I feel like there's not much I can add except to say my big, hairy, audacious goal is the end of apathy. I envision the end of apathy. And with that, perhaps to put it in the generative, is the recognition that we at our fundamental humanness are deeply connected and deeply caring, and that success for us happens in this instance. It happens in the experience of right now. And so I think we have the possibility in the framework of moving from solving problems to addressing possibility. We have the opportunity now to create the future we wish to inhabit in every single instance of our lives, in every breath we take, in every conversation we have. How do we recognize that our future is here right now in this crystal prism, or in the practice of learning how to sing bluegrass publicly, which, Anne, we're all waiting for that to happen. And perhaps in that, a return to who we are, a return to who we have always been, the calling, the kind of shamanic calling that I think we're all trying to lean back into. The apathy manifested beyond us, I feel, has its roots within us. And so if we want to undo the fourth wall and undo the silos, we have to be ruthless in how we edit those silos out from within ourselves. And perhaps with that, I'll pause.
That is absolutely beautiful. I can't tell you how inspiring this conversation was, and a little scary, right? You have all these geniuses that you're trying to pull their genius out, but you have utterly sort of, there's so much in this conversation that has transformed the way that I think about myself and how I will approach art. And what I really hope is that it's created a platform for the Creative Care Institute as we move on for your next conversation, and that people really can take some of this with them as the day continues. And I know that we're going to be moving to Q&A now, and Vijay has volunteered, I understand. If that still stands, to give us a little transition as we move towards Q&A, that would be fantastic.
My violin quickly, yeah.
Yeah. So thanks everyone for being here. And I think I'm going to turn it over now to Carrie and maybe Carol to figure out how we're doing the Q&A. And here we go with our transition.
Yeah, as we prepare for this quick performance from Vijay, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We'll get to as many as we can.
He shouldn't be shy. He could tune with us listening.
So we've mentioned hallelujahs a couple of times. And while you're all muted, you're welcome to offer your hallelujahs.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was absolutely gorgeous. So I think we're ready for Q&As.
Yeah, so feel free to keep adding questions, but one of the first things that came up that I'm sure is pressing on a lot of people's minds are with the pandemic, how do we best make connections with the population that's confined to home or confined into rooms in communal living that don't have easy access to technology?
I can jump in there a little bit and say, stay tuned for the rest of the Institute. That's really the goal, is to help people figure out in this moment that has erected obstacles for connection, to tap into people's creativity. And what we've been doing is observing what other people have been doing, to sort of spill over those barricades that have been erected, and to do it in an equitable way that addresses that not everyone, first of all, not everyone has computers or smartphones or Wi-Fi. And when we did Islands of Milwaukee back in 2011 to 2014, if we would have given everyone a tablet, we would have made them targets. We would have made them more vulnerable. So I think reverting to very simple human connection through telephone, through mail, has been beautiful to watch. Window work, enchanting of public spaces, when people are able to get out and about, the delivery of kits. I'm still struck by the health equity jam sessions. It's such a simple thing of drawing people together just to share music and to create the space for that. Beth Solzberg's on the call. The memory cafes have been just taking up online capacity really, really quickly. Family caregiving groups have been going to both phone access and Zoom-like. And in Durham, we shifted from in-person gatherings to some very simple phone access or Zoom access creative workshops. So I think there's a lot of those tools out there that we'll be discussing, I think, in the rest of the Institute, but also in the Time Slips resource page, you'll find a lot of that.
Great. So the COVID-19 pandemic has brought up and intensified, brought to the surface a lot of the injustices that we face in our society, and especially the inequities within our aging community. So one question is asking about the economic injustices in our care facilities and the pay rate of caregivers and the quality of services that our elders are receiving. So just thinking about how we begin to address that through our work as well.
So, I mean, I'll try to tackle that, even though it is a real challenge. And I think that one of the things that I think public health people can do is really to spend time talking with people who actually run these organizations, and also those who are frontline workers, and advocating for their needs with policymakers. So people who actually have resources and can allocate them in different ways. So I think one of the challenges with this is that oftentimes the frontline workers are pitted against the facility owners. And so it's them versus us. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to vilify the facility owners. A lot of times they are doing the best they can with limited resources as well. So I think we have to make sure that when resources are being made available, one of the things that I've seen is that people who have more resources to actually apply for them are more likely to get them than people who don't. So I think what we have to do is to make sure that there aren't a lot of barriers to people who perhaps run like smaller facilities or care for groups that have less income, and make sure that the funding that comes from national or from state level don't go disproportionately to people who actually don't need them as much. So I think that's where we can really work with policymakers as public health professionals. And I think that's where I'm speaking from that vantage point, but I'm sure others may have other ideas.
I think on a very simple level, that question needs to enter the vernacular. It hasn't been asked. It hasn't, there's still shame around frailty and late life and care and asking for help and hiding of caregiving, and I think there's also just now that's where we are, and that's life. Let's talk about it. Let's ask that question. Let's insist, let's end in that way. It's also ending apathy, but ending shame around care and around disability, around asking and expecting equity in care, and that care is okay. In a very, very simple way, that we infuse that into the conversations in our family and friends. We stop whispering it and let it enter our vernacular. I also put up a link to the Domestic Workers Alliance, which is doing a lot of intense advocacy work right now in that exact sector and caring across generations. Both Aijinpu is part of both organizations. Really great work there as well.
I was saying earlier about these distinctions that we make between ourselves and among ourselves, perhaps due to our jobs. The situation around, for example, visiting artists into communities that have daily practices of their own, and then what is the relationship between the visiting artist and the people who work there every day? How is that handled? In what way has what's the design of what's going on in the place that allows for the people who work there every day to have voice in what's happening? Sometimes we jump to those being cared so fast, we miss the caregiver, the person changing the sheets. And it's actually really paying attention to the needs of these people, what it is that they want and desire, find that out. And it may be a whole separate thing that is then carried out in some other partnerships that are brought in, or perhaps again, the artists and cultural workers who are there can attend to. And each place is so unique. So even Lisa, as you said, we don't want to set up these adversarial things that can so fast, happen. Just to keep looking even at where's the design happening, what's the design, how does that all take place? Whether we're actually going in or whether we're talking to people over the radio.
More questions, Kathy or Carrie?
Yeah, one question I'm interested in hearing the panel's thoughts on is probably a common thing that we all struggle with is this idea of advocating for arts and creativity with our colleagues and leadership. How do we create the space for this type of work when we're in a pandemic and folks are so focused on sort of those immediate, more like physical needs versus the emotional or mental health needs? So ways of kind of advocating for the arts and creativity, and then also not just bringing them in, but also the idea of like, how do we pay them and ensure that they are seen as valuable?
Who might have an answer to that one? Or a creative answer, even if they don't have the right answer.
I don't know if there's any such thing as the right answer, but I'm also looking at the question that was just asked in relationship to the question from Kathy DeWitt, which is referencing the idea of combining an artistic or musical offering with essential services. And the idea, I mean, like right now, to speak from my own experience, right now in Skid Row, we're trying to coordinate these art kits to be kind of delivered in accordance to the testing, the COVID testing that's happening in Skid Row, so that we're actually bringing people in to be sort of surveyed and taken care of and tested, and they're also given a kit at the same time. And so there is this ongoing relationship with care providers who are on the ground right now. And this speaks to Liz's earlier point of it can become so easy for us as the artist to become the volunteerist, where we're only coming in and there for the event that we can kind of pat ourselves on the back for and then depart, without realizing that the essential service is not only there for us, but also for the care providers. And that's where we can start to ask the questions around burnout as well. Because we know that first responders are burning out at a higher rate than ever before. So how are we leaning into this? And I wonder what it means for us to also, just as Lisa was mentioning earlier, have to change the way that we think about our utility or what we're actually even offering in the space, that maybe our job is as much to be tech support. Like right now, one of my young program directors is driving from SRO to SRO all over LA County, showing folks in their 70s and 80s how to use a trackpad on a mouse. And that's just what his job is. If he happens to bring his cello, that's wonderful. But his job is to be full-time tech support for us right now. And he brings groceries to each one of those folks when he does. So I think that, again, we need to think about the delivery of the artistic goods as in deep integration with the delivery of everything else. And if that can happen in relationship with the people who are on the ground right now, then I think we're asking different questions of what the delivery of that actual end means.
I would also say that drawing on the dialogues that inspired that Liz has done across science and the arts is to continue those, because I noticed somebody also talked about the siloing of funding, and that in the philanthropic and in the grant and the research funding, we have to continue to advocate for the integration of those things, because otherwise we get separate projects set up, and that's not helpful. If we get to a place where artists are integrated into, like there's Lisa, I remember you talking about the PCORI, the person-centered research grants, that I'm now talking with UW-Madison about how to do telestories across the whole state, having artists do phone calls to rural elders, and having them co-create by telephone in sessions and then measure it for impact of reducing isolation and reducing mainly reducing isolation, because now we have that bright line between isolation and health risk is pretty clear. So I think we can't do that unless we continue to just say the arts are effective, the arts matter, let's have a dialogue and be curious about how we can integrate across both those for fundable, sustainable sources.